Oh, what's up fellow nerds? I'm your host Dr. McKay and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a full history breakdown of the gate builders, better known as the Ancients or Lantians. In this breakdown I'll be covering the entire history of the Ancients, so strap in folks, this could be a long video. But before we get started, if you like the content and want to see more like this, feel free to like, comment and subscribe. Your support really helps this channel out. So with all that said, let's go. So before we dive into the history of the gate builders, there are many names that are given to them like the Alterans, Lantians, Ancients or the Ancients, the Ancestors and of course the gate builders. I will be referring to them by their different titles that they have during their many different points in their history, as to keep up with the continuity of their history, as their history spans hundreds of millions of years. So with that little bit of explanation out the way, let's dive into the history of the gate builders. So to begin the history breakdown, we start with a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Wait, that's the wrong franchise, but it's not incorrect. To be more precise, we have to go back several hundred millions of years ago to a far off distant galaxy, to a planet named Celestis. On this planet, evolution took place, and after eons of evolution, evolved the first evolution of humanity. These humans over time developed technology and religion, and for a time lived in harmony, until a philosophical division emerged, dividing the one race of humans into two distinct factions, or races. These divisions saw the Alterans on one side, who relied more on science and rational thinking for understanding the universe, and on the other side the Ori, who leaned heavily on their religion and began to push more and more their beliefs, till they became so extreme, culminating in the Ori attempting to wipe out the Alterans, who opposed the Ori's ways. The Ori, far greater in number than the Alterans, they built an army to fight and ultimately wipe out the Alterans. The Alterans, small in number though, did consider using their technology to defend themselves, with one piece of technology being an ark built by an Alteran named Emilius that could force the Ori to change their beliefs. But faced with the genocide or a war of attrition with the Ori, and holding to a belief of freedom of choice above all else, the Alterans ultimately decided to build a ship and leave their homeworld and their galaxy behind, leaving the Ori to their ways. The Alterans, now in self-exile from their home, set out on a great exodus across the stars for many thousands of years, eventually discovering the Milky Way galaxy around 175 million years ago, discovering and colonizing their first planet, Dakara. So after leaving their home galaxy behind, the Alterans settled in the Milky Way galaxy and began to colonize many worlds. Their first world they settled was the planet Dakara, and then from there the planet Terra, which later would be referred to as Earth. The Alterans, now free from the Ori to pursue science, developed extremely fast, building more ships to find other worlds to colonize, and some of the early colonies were on the planet Praklarush, with the colony being called Teonas. The Alterans now spread out and growing their population, they needed a more effective method of interstellar travel between worlds, and from an idea an Alteran named Emilius had, as the Alterans left their home galaxy, they developed the Astrea Porta, or Stargate. These devices allowed for instantaneous travel between two stargates via a wormhole from one location to another across a galaxy, and with this incredible breakthrough in technology allowing for instant travel between worlds, the Alterans began to develop the first versions of the Stargates, alongside many other technological breakthroughs like early harnessing of zero-point energy. And now it's unclear if the prototype version 1 Stargates were seeded within the Milky Way galaxy first, then upgraded later, but what is known is around 100 to 50 million years ago, the Alterans, discovering a structure embedded deep within the background radiation of the Big Bang, set out about building a fleet of ships with one purpose: to learn and hopefully discover what this structure is. The fleet of ships were called seed ships, with the sole purpose of flying ahead of the main ship, the Destiny. The seed ships were to scout worlds, gather resources, build and place the version 1 Stargates on worlds along a path for Destiny to follow. And 15 million years ago, Destiny was launched from Earth to begin its mission. So that is the information we know for definite for the version 1 Stargates. For the version 2 or the Milky Way Stargates, the oldest Stargate discovered was the one found in Antarctica, dating back over 50 million years old. So my guess is that as the seed ships and Destiny were being built and launched, the version 2 Milky Way Stargates were being seeded within the Milky Way galaxy to create the first Stargate network, sometime around 50 million years ago. The Alterans, now the most advanced race in the Milky Way galaxy, spread out and explored, discovering many new life and creating more advanced technology, and began work on their city ship project. A project that was in the early design phase during the launching of the Destiny. The city ship project saw the construction and completion of 2 city ships, Atlantis on Earth and the Decenia on Dakara, around 30 million years ago. Along with perfecting harnessing zero-point energy, as the cities required these to run. And with Atlantis and Earth becoming the seat of the Alterans' power and government within the galaxy, the Alterans are now at the height of their power in the Milky Way. They began to shepherd the younger races like the Asgard around 12 to 11 million years ago, and fostered a teacher-apprentice relationship with them, guiding them on the path of science and exploration. Eventually leading the Alterans after 3.5 billion years of teaching, declaring the Asgard as equal peers, and shortly after this event, the Alterans alongside with the Asgard entered into an alliance with the Nox and the Furlings, 2 other races that were sufficiently advanced in mind and technology to be considered equals alongside the Alterans and the Asgard. These 4 races stood as equals in the galaxy and declared themselves the 4 great races, and to honour this alliance they built a meeting place called Heliopolis. This meeting place between the Alterans, Asgard, Nox and the Furlings was a place they could gather to share their experiences, debate matters of mutual interest and resolve any disputes that arose. This alliance stood for a few million years, prospering through science and mutual understanding. That is until around 7.5 million years ago, when the Alterans were constructing their new crown jewel of a city called Visuban. This city was speculated to be more powerful than the city ships and was to become their new capital. But during the early construction of the city, the Alterans began to be afflicted by a deadly plague, with the origins of the plague being told in the novel Stargate SG-1 Transitions. But bear in mind, the novel's timestamps are wrong and don't make sense in the chronological history of the ancients, so using this novel's information, I will try to fit it into my timeline. So here we go. Sometime around 7.5 million years ago, an Alteran was born called Amara. Growing up, she became aware of Origin, the religion of the Ori, and somehow began communicating with the Dosai of the Ori. The Dosai, being the Ori followers' highest leader and vessel of the Ori, corrupted and instructed Amara to create a plague to either convert the Alterans to Origin for a cure, or wipe them out if they refused Origin. Amara, under the instruction of the Dosai, unleashed the plague on Visuban and Pedion Elysium, and it began to spread quickly among the Alterans. Unaware of the deadly and highly contagious nature of the plague, in the beginning, fought to combat the plague, ultimately spreading it quickly through the other Alteran colonies. Some Alterans turned to science to find a cure or to prevent the plague altogether, using technology like a time machine. This, however, failed, only creating a time loop bubble, and medical science yielded no cure or answers either. The only thing that yielded some results against the plague was the few Alterans that have gained the healing powers from their evolution. They could cure the plague in others, and in some cases prevent reinfection. However, they became carriers of the plague, not succumbing to the illness, but spreading it further amongst the population. The Alterans, seeing no cure in sight, they began to make plans to save themselves. They isolated worlds not touched by the plague, seeded repositories of their knowledge around the galaxy and decided to wipe all infected life from the galaxy. The Alterans' plans were drastic, but the only way. They built an energy weapon on Dakara capable of destroying all organic life infected by the plague, and set about reseeding human life throughout the galaxy after the destruction was complete. The Alterans, now ready for their plan, evacuated all the non-infected Alterans to their city ships of Atlantis and Desenia and began their second great exodus. They fired the weapon, wiping out all the life that was infected with the plague, and entrusted the Asgard and the Furlings with their legacy and duty to shepherd the reseeded planet's new life after they left. The Alterans on Atlantis lifted off Earth and set a course for a new galaxy, the Pegasus Galaxy. The sister ship Desenia also lifted off Dakara at round about the same time and set a course too for Pegasus. But unknown to Atlantis, the Desenia was not safe. The plague managed to find its way into the population of the city, and during its journey to Pegasus, the Desenia dropped out of hyperspace in the void between the two galaxies, and the population, to stop the spread of the plague, ended themselves, leaving the Desenia floating in the void. It was later discovered by the Daedalus in the short story Stargate Atlantis, Hermioid's last mission. So with the loss of the Desenia, Atlantis and her entire population was the last remaining part of the Alterans' great civilization from the Milky Way galaxy. The Alterans entered Pegasus around 7 million years ago and discovered a planet to land on. They named the planet Lantia, and thus the Alterans became the Lantians. As the Alterans entered the Pegasus galaxy 7 million years ago, they found a galaxy devoid of any sentient life. They explored a little of the galaxy, discovering many habitable worlds, but ultimately settling on a planet mostly comprised of water. Naming the planet Lantia, the Alterans from this point forward became known as the Lantians. The Lantians, all alone in this vast new galaxy, set about seeding the galaxy with baseline human life and placing the version 3 Stargates on many worlds. These Pegasus Stargates are the newest and last Stargates created by the Lantians. The Lantians spread out to many worlds in the Pegasus galaxy, seeding life and creating new city ships and technology. They would begin to prosper for the next 6 million years, living in harmony with the lower humans, building many outposts and civilizations, and setting themselves on a course for ascension. The galaxy was peaceful, teeming with humans and Lantian life. However, peace would eventually be threatened as dark forces were looming and growing within the galaxy. Now, with the Wraith, we have two very different histories. One of natural evolution from the Eratus bug, feeding on humans, and over time, 100,000 years, mutated into the Wraith, developed interstellar technology and went to war with the Lantians. Or what actually happened, which was revealed in the 5th novel, Stargate Atlantis Secrets. So what actually happened was, around 900 years before Atlantis was evacuated, a small group of Lantians began to experiment on humans to create immortality, just in case ascension was not achievable. The Lantians took 100 human males and 100 human women from around the galaxy and took them to a frozen planet and conducted many experiments on them. However, only 9 of the females survived, along with all 100 of the males, test subjects. The surviving human subjects were no longer human, but something else. They become a new species, the first Wraith. The Lantians, unaware of what they had created, and the Wraith's newly found abilities like telepathy, lost control of all 109 Wraith. And in the confusion, the Wraith escaped the facility, stealing the facility's EPM. They quickly disappeared into the galaxy, always being hunted by the Lantians. The Wraith quickly adapting to their new nature and biological urges. The females began to feed on other humans and reproduce, and thus the Wraith population began to grow. And over the next few hundred years, the Wraith would steal technology from the Lantians and develop their own ships and technology that would eventually be able to challenge the Lantians. And with their hatred for the Lantians ever growing stronger, the Wraith, after building up their forces, attacked, catching the Lantians by surprise and winning the first few battles. However, the Lantian ships and technology were far more advanced than the Wraith's, and the tide of battle quickly turned into the Lanteans' favour. Overconfident in their ships and technology, the Lanteans pushed deeper and deeper into Wraith-controlled areas of space, believing they could not lose. Unfortunately, their overconfidence led them to fall into the Wraith's trap. The Wraith lured the Lantean ships in and pounced. They disabled a few Lantean ships and boarded them, stealing the ship's ZPMs before destroying them. The Wraith would take these spoils of war and mass-produce Wraith soldiers and ships, and in just 100 years outnumbered the Lanteans. The Wraith's sudden increase in numbers took the Lanteans by surprise, capturing and destroyed every Lantean colony they came across, pushing the Lanteans back. The Lanteans, now on the back foot and retreating, tried some extreme measures to fight back. They began work on Project Arcturus, trying to produce zero-point energy from their own space-time to try and obtain unlimited power generation. But due to the creation of exotic particles that don't obey the laws of physics, the experiment failed, killing the research team and the entire population of the planet. But not before the weapon being powered by it destroyed an entire fleet of Wraith ships. Another project the Lanteans worked on were the replicators. These microscopic nanites were created at first to be small microscopic weapons, but as the nanites evolved, they took the form of their creators, and not happy with the results of the experiment and not the weapon they had hoped for, the Lanteans decided to destroy all the replicators and abandon the project. However, even after the planet was bombarded by many Lantean warships, a small group of nanites survived and began to replicate, programmed to attack the Wraith. Another project undertaken but in secret was by Janus, a rogue Lantean. He developed a device called the Altera device, which, when activated, disrupts the subspace frequency of Wraith hyperdrives, causing any Wraith ship that enters hyperspace to be destroyed. Unfortunately, this device had a very bad side effect that caused any active Stargate to overload and explode. Janus quickly abandoned the project after this and began work on his next project, which was a time machine puddle jumper, which comes back into play later on. The war with the Wraith continued for the next few hundred years, with the Wraith pushing the Lanteans all the way back to Atlantis. The Lanteans had very little resources left to continue to hold the Wraith back, thus they submerged the city into the ocean to hold out against the Wraith's assault, and around 10,000 years ago they sent the Lantean warship Aurora out to retrieve intel on a weakness in Wraith technology. Unfortunately, the Aurora never made it back to Atlantis, and with more Wraith ships arriving over Atlantia every day, and the Lanteans unable to replace the drones and ZPMs for continued defense, they decided to try one last option. They tried to pursue peace with the Wraith. They sent out a peace delegation escorted by their most powerful warships to seek peace with the Wraith, but it was not meant to be. The Wraith numbers quickly overwhelmed the Lantean ships, destroying them along with the last remaining Lantean evacuation ship. Leaving the population of Atlantis, the remaining Lanteans left. With no hope remaining to find a way out of this war, the Lanteans decided to abandon Atlantis and head back to Earth, surrendering the Pegasus galaxy to the control of the Wraith. The Lanteans dialed Earth's Stargate and evacuated the city, leaving the city submerged at the bottom of the ocean. 10,000 years ago in the Pegasus galaxy, the Lanteans, pushed to their limits by the war with the Wraith, was left with only one choice for survival. They chose to abandon their home to survive. The great city of Atlantis, home to the Lanteans for eons and eons, their capital and seat of government, their last bastion of hope, forced to the bottom of the ocean. With no hope left, the Lanteans dialed the Stargate to Earth, and the remaining surviving Lanteans made the journey back to Earth, leaving behind everything they ever built. And once through the gate, there would be no return. And as the last Lantean walked through the Stargate, the city wept as it was laid to slumber, void of life from the once great civilization that inhabited this great city. And with the last Lanteans through the gate, the Stargate shut down, not to be activated again for the next 10,000 years. The Lanteans now back on Earth with nothing but what they brung with them. The the Lanteans quickly realized there was no hope of rebuilding their civilization. There were too few of them left, and the Earth was so harsh, the humans were so primitive by comparison, there was no hope of living among them as Lanteans and rebuilding their society. So the remaining Lanteans, understanding their time has ended, decided to embrace ascension, but before setting out on that path, they spread out across the Earth to many lands and planted a few small seeds of civilization, sharing their history as a myth, and some Lanteans also chose to mate with the primitive humans to pass on their genetic code, in hopes that the humans would one day inherit all the wonders the Lanteans left behind. And after the Lanteans seeded civilization among the smaller tribes of man, they made their way to the Stargate at the southern pole and went off into seclusion and meditation to begin their journey of ascension, with nearly all that followed the path achieving ascension sometime after going into isolation from the galaxy, and with them leaving this plane of existence and transforming into pure energy and ascending to a higher plane of existence, becoming immortal beings, they unlocked greater understanding of the universe and came to the conclusion that the lower planes from which they came should be left alone, creating rules for their ascended existence to never interfere in the mortal planes and let the natural course of life and free will continue without them interfering. This rule was enforced to the highest degree, but around 7,000 to 8,000 years later, around the 5th century AD, the now ascended Moros, one of the Lantean high counselors of the Council of Atlantis, he came to the conclusion that the Ori, who are also ascended beings, were too great of a threat to ignore, and decided to descend himself while retaining all of his ascended knowledge and most of his highly evolved powers. He began work on a weapon that could destroy ascended beings. He entrusted his secret to King Arthur and a few of his noble men, who came to call Moros Mirrodin, later Merlin. He set about creating the Glastonbury Cavern to hold his technology and devised a way to create the anti-Ori weapon in secret by shifting out of phase and hiding from the view of the other ascended beings. And with the other ascended worried that building a weapon that could wipe out ascended beings could fall into the wrong hands and could be used against them, they sent Morris's old rival Ganus Lau, another ascended Lantean from Atlantis. She was sent to observe and watch over Moros and to stop him if necessary. She would later be known as Morgan Le Fay, and after a time of watching Moros, now Merlin, she began to understand the threat posed by the Ori and began to sympathize. Merlin eventually completed the weapon and moved it to the planet Camelot with Arthur, and after a short time he set about using the weapon on the Ori, but knowing the risks, Morgan destroyed the weapon before Merlin could use it, but realizing Merlin was right in building such a weapon due to the Ori's threat, she captured Merlin and placed him in stasis to be able to build the weapon again, if the need arise. Morgan would then go back to the higher planes and watch for the next 2,000 years. She would later help Daniel Jackson in guiding him to find Merlin and the weapon, and in doing so, she got banished by the other Ascended for directly interfering in the lower planes. SG-1 would find Merlin in stasis and revive him to have him begin construction of the weapon, but fatigued by age, Merlin would transfer his consciousness into Daniel Jackson to finish the weapon, and with Daniel completing the weapon, he sent it to the Ori galaxy and wiped them out. However, the threat was not eliminated, as Adria, a living Ori born from their powers, ascended and took all of the Ori's power for herself. Knowing the threat was still there, Morgan, still an ascended being, but in exile, sent visions of a long-lost forgotten piece of technology to Daniel for him to find the Ark of Truth. The Ark of Truth was created by the Alterans back in their home galaxy on Celestis. It is capable of making whoever looks into it believe that the Ori are not gods, and with the help of Morgan, SG-1 opened the Ark in front of the Docite, breaking the power from the ascended Adria. Now weakened, Morgan seized the moment and began to fight Adria. The fight would end up being a perpetual battle, and in doing so, removing the last remaining threat of the Ori. The Ascended Lanteans, or Ancients as they are called now, remained in their higher plane, never interfering or acknowledging what the people of Earth did for them. No one really knows what the ancients do as ascended beings, but there they will remain until the death of the universe, their long history mostly lost and forgotten, but still their legacy remains. In the present day of the Stargate universe, the ancients have long since left the realms of the lower planes, but their once great civilization was so vast that a lot of their technology is still around and functioning, eons after the ancients left. Their greatest legacies the ancients left behind are the second evolution of humanity that are spread out between two galaxies. However, the humans of Earth have directly inherited the ancients' will for exploration and to seek greater understanding, following closely in the ancients' footsteps, inheriting some of the vast marvels of technology left behind by the ancients, with the two most important marvels being inherited are the city of Atlantis and the Destiny. Another great legacy left behind was the Stargate networks in both galaxies. This network brings together thousands of worlds in both galaxies, giving the many peoples of the galaxy the ability for vast exploration, trade and movement between worlds without the need to travel via starship. The amount of technology left by the ancients between the two galaxies is not known and is just lying in wait to be discovered. The ancients may be gone, but they still have a major impact on the two galaxies' evolution. The ancients, although ethically good in nature, did make great mistakes, still felt to the present day. These legacies left behind have come at great costs to both galaxies. Some of these mistakes are leaving the Ori to become stronger and not interfering sooner, creating the Wraith and ultimately leaving the Pegasus galaxy at the mercy of the Wraith, and creating the Asuran replicators, who at some point after the Lanteans left the Pegasus galaxy, replicated and attacked the Wraith. However, the Wraith reprogrammed them and they lay dormant on their homeworld till Dr. McKay reactivated their program, essentially forcing them to attack human worlds as a strategy to fight the Wraith. And even 10,000 years after the Lanteans left the galaxies behind, their mistakes are still being felt to this day. But due to their hope that one day the humans of Earth would inherit their vast technology, their legacy remains one of hope, with the Asgard officially giving the peoples of Earth the title of the Fifth Great Race, and entrusting the hopes of the ancients and the Asgard upon them to carry on both of their legacies. This last part of the breakdown of the ancients' history are pieces of information I have left out purposefully to allow for it to have its own section here, as it is vital information for the overall history leading up to the present day. I want to start with an alternative history regarding the city of Atlantis. So in the original history, 10,000 years ago, the Lanteans evacuated the city and left it to slumber, leaving the city to remain. 10,000 years later, the Earth Atlantis expedition discovered Atlantis at the bottom of the ocean and began to explore. Unknown to them at the time, the city's power was failing and the city began to flood, killing all but one of the expedition. Dr. Elizabeth Weir, Major Shepard and Zelenka found their way into a ship that turned out to be Janus's illegal time machine, mentioned before. Shepard, in the confusion, unintentionally transported the three of them back 10,000 years to a few days before the evacuation took place by the Lanteans, and in the confusion of the transport, they took fire and crashed, with Dr. Weir being the only survivor left. She was brought before the High Council of the Lanteans and explained her story. She explained how the people of Earth found the city 10,000 years after the Lanteans left, but it flooded, killing her team, and she pleaded with the High Council to go back and change the outcome, but was denied by Morris, and the time machine was destroyed. Janus, however, elated that the city would remain and be found by their legacy, set in motion a series of events that would allow the city and the expedition to survive in the future. He set the ZPMs to be rotated every 3,500 years and set a failsafe that would raise the city from the bottom of the ocean if the shield failed. The only problem was that the ZPMs needed to be manually rotated, leaving Dr. Weir to stay behind and go into stasis to be awoken, to rotate the ZPMs and to be finally reunited with the expedition in the far future. And so when the time came for the Earth expedition to discover Atlantis again, the city, just as the shield collapsed, fired its engines and raised Atlantis to the surface, allowing for the expedition to continue on. This time travel event created two timelines, one where Atlantis was lost and one where the expedition survived, and the city and the people of Earth went on to help the people of the Pegasus Galaxy. This was a major history moment that changed the very outcome of the history of Atlantis and the Pegasus Galaxy. The other major history point I want to cover is that not all of the Lanteans were on Atlantis and evacuated to Earth. There is currently two groups of Lanteans that we know of that lived on after Atlantis's Lanteans ascended. The first group was the crew of the Tria, a Lantean warship that began a journey to Earth and ended up losing their hyperdrive. They pressed on at near light speed, entering the Doppler effect, effectively slowing down their time from the rest of normal space, and later on being discovered by the Daedalus 10,000 years after they had left the Pegasus Galaxy. The crew, being the rightful owners of Atlantis, took the city back under their control, and for a time, until they were all killed by the Asuran replicators, and the city would then revert ownership back to Earth. The other group of Lanteans that lived on to the present was the survivors of the city ship Adma. This city was once close with Atlantis, and over time began to have separate views from the rest of the Lanteans. It reached a point where the population of Adma would live in isolation from their Lantean kin, and would go on to survive the war with the Wraith and the next 10,000 years until the Tau rediscovered them. The population of Adma would devolve into barbarism, relied on gladiatorial games of competition for entertainment, resulting in high risk and even death. The city would shortly after being discovered by Shepard and McKay would be plunged into the nearby star, being destroyed. This event took place in the Stargate Atlantis novel Brimstone. This event marks to the current history the official end of all living Lanteans, leaving the Ascended Ancients the last traces of the once great race. Whew. So there we have it, my fellow nerds. The full history of the Alterans, Lanteans and Ancients is complete. I really went down the rabbit hole with this one, and I have covered all the major historical moments of their few 100 million-year-old history, and boy was it fun to write. It's taken me around 40 hours to write the script, and I was cooking. I hope you all enjoy this breakdown, and I just want to give a special shout out to D's Matters on YouTube for following my progress in writing the script. So thank you, buddy, for all of your great comments. It really does mean a lot. And I hope you all have enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to like, comment and subscribe for more. I have been your host, Dr. McKay. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Cheers and goodbye, and have a good rest of your day. Bye bye all.